From John Jones getting caught with his pants down multiple times to the great Anderson Silva testing positive for banned substances, these are the most controversial UFC cheating scandals. No one has caused more headaches for Dana White than the GOAT. There is no doubt that Johnny Bones is the greatest fighter to have stepped inside the octagon. His record is immaculate, and he has been dominating legends for the better part of a decade. But despite that, he has had a lot of trouble with authorities over the years, and this has left a bitter taste in the mouths of his fans regarding his greatness. In particular, his use of controlled substances has always landed him in hot water, the first of which took place back in 2015 when he tested positive for cocaine. This was right before he was slated to fight Daniel Cormier at UFC 182. Fortunately for him, he wasn't suspended by the Nevada State Athletic Commission because cocaine wasn't exactly on the ban list. But this forced him to issue a statement apologizing to his family, fans, and the UFC. To make up for what he did, John entered rehab for exactly 1 day. Back then, he insisted that he wasn't a frequent user, but I'm not sure how true that is. You see, he later boasted in his interviews that he beat DC in 2017 after snorting a whole lot of coke the night before. But that wasn't the only time he put something illegal into his body. In 2016, he was supposed to fight DC once again at UFC 200, but just days before the fight, he was forced out of it. This time, he tested positive for clomiphene and letrozole. Now that these drugs are primarily designed for female fertility and breast cancer treatment, but they can also be used to boost testosterone levels, which in turn helps improve athletic performance. Jones pleaded innocent this time and claimed that he had received a contaminated batch of tadalafil, a drug used to treat erectile dysfunction. I mean, as if it wasn't embarrassing enough for John already, USADA determined that he didn't take the substances intentionally, but they still handed him a 1-year suspension just so the drugs could be flushed out of his system completely. But it was like there's no keeping John away from PEDs because he did it again in 2017. After he knocked out Cormier in the title fight at UFC 214, Jones was flagged for the anabolic steroid turinabol. As a result, he was stripped of his title for the 3rd time, and DC was crowned the champ. It was pretty serious this time because USADA was considering a 4-year ban, but his suspension was reduced to only 15 months after he provided substantial assistance to them. That's a fancy word for ratting out one of his fellow fighters. Right after the suspension was over, Jones tested positive again for the same substance. The UFC had to change the venue from Las Vegas to Los Angeles to accommodate John. The NSAC had had enough of his shenanigans. Like if it had happened once, then maybe you could have believed that it might have been a contaminated supplement or something, but thrice? That just stinks to high heaven. Believe it or not, there are even funkier incidents, like TJ Dillashaw getting caught and telling a sob story. At first, it looked as if he actually had the decency to admit what he did, and that's pretty rare in MMA. While on Ariel Helwani's MMA show, TJ accepted his mistake and said that he has no excuses for selling his soul to the devil. He had been caught red-handed, and as a result, he was suspended for 2 years by USADA. Credit him to not be blaming it all on tainted supplements or contaminated medicine. TJ really looked genuinely sorry for what he did, and he even explained why he did it. Lieutenant Dan revealed to Chael Sonnen that it was all part of him trying to cut down to 125 pounds because he just wanted to become a double champ by defeating Henry Cejudo. So erythropoietin, or EPO, was the only viable way for him to do that, because otherwise he risked weakening himself too much. You see, guys, EPO triggers the body into producing more red blood cells, so it can help with grueling weight cuts for sure. That reason made a lot more sense because TJ had had trouble even cutting down to 135 in the past, so 125 would have been too brutal for him anyway. Make no mistake, it's still cheating. And according to his former friend and rival Cody Garbrandt, he has been doing it for a very long time. In fact, No Love actually told the world that TJ was on EPO before he even got caught. This was back in 2018, right before the second fight between these two. Now, I understand that Cody might have been a little bitter after 2 back-to-back losses against Dan, but he was right the first time as well. And being a former teammate meant that he knew more than your average Joe. Garbrandt wasn't buying all those weight-cutting excuses either. He even spoke about why and how TJ got caught. According to Cody, Dillashaw had figured out how to hoodwink the tests at 135, but it was a whole other story at 125 pounds. So it's likely that TJ made some miscalculations with that weight cut and ended up on USADA's hit list. That does seem like something that might have actually happened, to be honest. But this thing with Dillashaw pales in comparison to Brock Lesnar. No surprises there. Lesnar was on steroids, and he was only caught at the very end of his UFC career. Back in 2016, the Beast fought Mark Hunt in a heavyweight bout. Now those guys are scary even without steroids, but Lesnar just had to make it truly terrifying. He apparently took clomiphene as well, just like Jones. The drug can be used to mask the effects of actual steroids, as well as boost testosterone levels in the body, and that's why it's banned. But here's the interesting part. Lesnar failed 2 tests both before and after the fight. So how in the world was he even allowed to compete in the first place? The official statement is that the results of the test didn't come out after the fight. But then what's the point of conducting tests beforehand? No wonder Mark Hunt was livid. He blamed the UFC for not doing anything about it, even though they knew what Lesnar had been up to. The Australian was calling for the Beast's head and wanted heavy fines levied on him. It's understandable that Hunt was concerned for his life, because he had been locked in a cage with a guy who had been juicing for God knows how long. Mark was certain that Brock had been using steroids since the start of his career, and that's how he managed to win the title for himself in the past. Needless to say, Lesnar and his team denied all the allegations. Instead, they claimed that he had used asthma medication, eye medication, and foot cream, which were probably what caused positive tests. Back when Brock was at the top of his game in the octagon, USADA didn't exist, and the drug tests were nothing more than jokes. So it's possible he was doing a lot of stuff that shouldn't have been legal, much like Anderson Silva. That's right, guys. The Muhammad Ali of MMA has also been caught in multiple cheating scandals. As I said before, these guys were doing pretty well in their careers before USADA came along. The first time Silva was caught was right after his fight with Nick Diaz in 2015. He was flagged for having drostanolone and androstane in his system, and the fight was declared a no contest, even though the Spider managed to secure a unanimous decision win. There was a long, drawn-out hearing in which Silva pleaded not guilty and claimed that the test showed banned substances in his system because a friend had given him something, a sexual performance drug, to be precise, which came out of Thailand in an unmarked vial. The Athletic Commission didn't look too kindly at this, and Silva's testimony had gaping holes in it that certainly didn't help his case. The Brazilian apologized for his failure in the drug test. He also said that he didn't declare the medication due to privacy concerns. A few days later, anti-anxiety medication was also found in his system, for which he had a prescription but didn't declare it to the commission either. NSAC slapped him with a hefty fine along with a year-long ban from the octagon. But then he tested positive once again in 2017. This time, synthetic testosterone and a banned diuretic were found in his samples. The commission threatened a 4-year suspension and $500,000 in fines this time, but that didn't happen. Instead, he received another year-long suspension, which was later overturned because the committee determined that Silva hadn't taken the illegal substances intentionally. But by this point, the Spider's career was almost over anyway. Sure, he went on to fight a couple of times after that, but that wasn't the legendary Silva of old. These scandals brought his illustrious career into question with regard to whether he had been doping throughout his time in the UFC. Prior to the incident in 2015, Anderson had never failed any drug tests. But that's not saying a lot. As Joe Rogan revealed back then, they used to literally smell the fighters to figure out if they had used steroids. From the great Anderson Silva testing positive for banned substances to John Jones getting caught with his pants down multiple times, these were the most controversial UFC cheating scandals.